Earth Day is coming up on April 22nd. It is a special day set aside to celebrate our Earth. And sometimes I ask kids what planet they live on. And they think, oh yeah, it's the Earth. But I'm teasing you actually. So here's a little book about Earth Day and when it first started. Maybe it'll give you some ideas about what you can do to help the Earth that you live on. Earth Day by Robin Nelson. We celebrate Earth Day every year. This holiday is in April on the 22nd. People planned a special day to help the Earth. There was litter on the ground. So there was tons of litter on it. This took place way back about 6 years ago when we had our first Earth Day. The air was dirty. There was trash in lakes and rivers and oceans. Look at all that garbage. On March 22nd, 1970, America celebrated the first Earth Day. There were marches and concerts. And people took nature walks. People learned how to take care of the Earth. In 1990, people all over the world celebrated Earth Day. Now we celebrate Earth Day every April 22nd. We can pick up litter and recycle, and we can plant trees also. On Earth Day, we remember to take care of the Earth. We do that. We do what we can to help. But there's a lot more things, right? Here's like a Earth Day timeline of when it first started in 1962 and all the way up here till 1995. And some Earth Day facts. It was on the first Earth Day, the mayor of New York City stopped people from driving cars on 5th Avenue. He wanted to show how quiet and clean the city could be. One 20-year-old tree can produce only 700 paper grocery sacks. So that means that you could reuse your paper grocery sacks and then recycle them and make new trees. During World Earth Day in 1990, Japan held a garbage festival. Everyone watched garbage being recycled into everything from postcards to soap. Wow. Saving the world's rainforests is important. Rainforests give us rubber, fruit, nuts, medicines, and oxygen to breathe. That is very important. It takes many years to grow a tree, but only a minute or two to use one up. Nearly 2 million tons of junk mail arrives in American mailboxes each year. If 1 million of us stop getting junk mail each year, we could save 1.5 million trees. That's amazing. Here's a story called The Wump World, written by Peet. It's a fiction story, and it's about the Wumps. That's these little creatures here on the cover. And they live in a beautiful world until one day when the pollution show up. The Wump World gives you an idea about how bad it can get. Here is their world. It isn't the planet Earth or anything. The Wump world was a small world, very much smaller than our world. There were no great oceans. lofty mountains, giant forests, or broad sandy deserts. The Wump world was mostly grassy meadows and clumps of leafy green trees, with a few winding rivers and lakes. But it was perfect for the Wumps, who were the only creatures living there. The Wumps were simply grass eaters and spent most of their time grazing on tall, tender grass that grew in the meadows. In warm weather, they cooled themselves in the crystal clear rivers and lakes, and at night they slept in the shelter of the bumbershoot trees to keep the dew off their backs. Since the Wumps had no enemies, they wandered around just as they pleased with nothing whatever to worry about. However, the Wumps would have worried if they had known that someone 1,000,000 miles away was watching their world. One morning, the Wumps were awakened by a far-off humming sound. It seemed to be coming from somewhere above, and as the humming grew into a heavy roar, sleepy-eyed Wumps crept through the trees for a peek at the sky. Zooming straight for the earth came a great flock of pot-bellied monsters with tails and fins, spitting fire and shooting out streaks of black smoke. As the monsters swooped down to land, huge legs sprang from their bulging sides, and like gaping mouths, doors flew open, then ramps shot to the ground, and down the ramps came a horde of tiny creatures swarming out into the meadow. These were the pollutions from the planet Pollutus. They had left their worn-out old planet to start a new life in a new world. After such a long journey, the pollutions were overjoyed to find themselves on solid ground once more. They were all prattling with excitement as they followed their leader, the topmost pollution and world chief. Across the meadow, at the top of a hill, the chief stopped for a long look at the surrounding countryside. Finally, he said, "Looks good. We'll take it. Plant the flag, Sergeant, and let's get the things going." One shrill trumpet blast brought giant machines thundering out of the yawning spaceships, rolling down runways and out into the meadow. The timid Wumps had been watching warily from the shelter of the trees, and at the sight of the giant machines, they were horrified. "Wump, Wump," they cried, and in a wild-eyed panic, they went humpity-clumping off through the trees to go diving headlong into the nearest cave. And down they tumbled, head over heels, through a twisting tunnel to end up huddled together in dark caverns, while the earth-shaking machines rumbled and roared there high above. Once they got started, the monstrous machines moved at a furious pace, gobbling up trees and grinding them to bits. More giant machines flattened the ground, followed by great scoopers and scrapers and diggers and gigantic cranes. Soon, the entire Wump world was overrun. Oh my goodness. The busy little pollutions kept their mighty machines going full blast day and night without let up, in a frenzy to improve their wonderful new world. Suddenly, great cities sprang up, huge factory buildings with towering smokestacks, high-rise apartment buildings, and tall, tall office buildings. And above them, all loomed the 100-story skyscrapers. Along with the buildings came a tangle of streets and freeways with on-ramps and off-ramps, overpasses and underpasses, jammed with trucks and buses and cars of all sizes rushing pell-mell in every direction. It was one great turmoil of noise and confusion, and there was still more to come. Meanwhile, the poor Wumps remained underground, wandering aimlessly through the caverns, feeding on the fuzzy green moss growing on the ledges and the mushrooms clustered in the crannies, and sipping the sweet water from pools fed by underground springs. But they were very unhappy. For all they knew, they might have to spend the rest of their days down there. The Wumps didn't dare venture up to the surface, not even for a peek. They were much too frightened by the endless rumblings and roarings and loud screechings coming from above, and it was growing noisier by the day. Oh my goodness. There was more and more noise and more of everything, more buildings with more smokestacks, puffing more and more smoke, more freeways with more traffic shooting out more and more clouds of exhaust, more trash and more trash piles with more and more waste gushing into the rivers and lakes. Pretty soon the cities were so clouded by the factory smoke and the fumes from the freeways, the pollutions could barely breathe. They went sneezing and wheezing about the streets, grouching and grumbling and blaming one another for the awful mess they were in. One day, an angry crowd gathered outside the World Tower building, demanding to see the World Chief. When the chief appeared on the balcony, all the pollutions began shouting at once. We can't breathe the air. We can't drink the water. And we can't stand the noise. We've had enough. Achoo, sneezed the chief. I know just how you feel, and something will be done at once. I promise. With no time to lose, the chief called for a meeting with the 3 top outer spacemen. Gentlemen, he said, this world of ours has gone sour. We've got to get out of here quick, but first we must find a new world, a better one. That's your job, men. So go get going. Right-o, Chief, barked the men, and within 15 minutes they were at the spaceport aboard their spaceships. And zroosh, zroosh, zroosh. The men took off in 3 directions, and in seconds they were zooming about in outer space at 7,000 miles an hour. Days passed with no answer from the outer spacemen. After waiting a week, the world chief flew into a rage. Blast it all, he bellowed. What's keeping those blithering bubbleheads? Then one Monday morning, out of the dark, smudgy sky swooshed one of the spaceships. As the ship touched down, the man hopped out, shouting, I've done it! I've done it! I found a new world, a bigger and better world. Nice going, lad, cried the world chief, and the crowd gathered at the spaceport gave their hero one great rousing cheer, which ended in a fit of sneezing. In no time, the great news was sent flashing around the world over radio and TV warning all pollutions to be packed and ready to go within 24 hours. At dawn, the next day, the entire population swarmed into the space center and crowded aboard the giant spaceships. After double checking to make sure all pollutions were accounted for, the world chief gave the signal for blast off. With a thunderous roar, the giant ship shot off the ground, kazoom! Up and away through the smoke's blackened sky, they were gone, and at long last, peace and quiet settled over the Wump world. Sudden silence came as a shock to the Wumps. They could hardly believe their ears. Still, they were wanting to take no chances, and so they remained in their caverns with ears cocked for the slightest sound. After a long silence, they decided it was time to go. And led by the biggest one, they crept up the tunnel to the cave entrance to find it covered by a crust of cement. With one powerful push of his snout, the biggest Wump bumped his way through. Then one by one, the Wumps waddled out into the freeway and gaped in wide-eyed amazement. They had feared something awful was happening to their world. But this was much more than they could have imagined. They were staggered by the size of the huge buildings with walls and walls of windows looming up on every side, and the broad layers of hard, flat crust covering the earth, which felt strangely cold to their feet. There was no sign of any tree or tuft of grass. Even the sky was gone, and the Wumps wondered if there was anything left for them. At least they must find out. They wandered the freeways for miles, only to find more and more buildings and endless heaps of wreckage and rubble. For all they could see, their world was completely ruined. Footsore and weary, the Wumps were about to give up and head back for their cave when the biggest lump let out a joyful Wump. What is it? Just ahead of him was a grassy meadow with a clump of bumbershoot trees, all that was left of their lovely world. Wump wumping for joy, the Wumps went bounding off the freeway out into the meadow. Pretty soon the hungry Wumps were munching away on the tall, slender grass. Now there was new hope for the Wumps. In time, the murky skies would clear up and the rains would wash the scum from the rivers and lakes. The tall buildings would come tumbling down and the freeways would crumble away. And in time, the green growth would wind its way up through the rubble. But the Wump world would never be quite the same. By Bill Peet, The Wump World. Gives you an example of what it could get like if you don't take care of the earth. It would be like that.